Hi, this is Erika
And Michael Rue from Small Robot Studio.
and today we want to show you the process that we use in our day job as artists to create video game assets.
So we're looking here at a sword and we're starting with box modeling.
Of course, unlike most of the videos, you're not seeing Nomad, you are seeing Maya.
Which is pretty much where both of us cut our teeth, I guess, as 3D artists. And we spend the majority of our time creating 3D models in. So you've already got a concept here. You also did the concept as well.
I did.
So what's that process like, just briefly as an intro?
The concepting process was creating a bunch of silhouettes based on an idea, a cat sword, and they just evolve until you have something that works on 3D.
So going into box modeling, you have just the orthographic front to work from?
Yes, I do. I have on the back I have on the other monitor the reference of what this looks like on 3D, but I usually start with a flat base, which I then push into 3D, I guess.
And for those who don't know, what is box modeling?
Box modeling refers to hard objects, I guess, inorganic things.
Not necessarily more, it's just working from cuboid shapes and extrusion. Technically, you could do organic shapes using box modeling, like a tentacle, for example, could be box modeled.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess that it also has to do with how you deal with the mesh itself. Like in Nomad is really sculpty-like, but here you have control over every single point and face.
And box modeling does suit inorganic shapes a lot more, obviously, than sculpting, because you will get very specific edges rather than trying to freehand stuff like you would in ZBrush or Nomad Sculpt.
Yeah, exactly. You can really do either things, inorganic things with box modeling or the other way around. It just makes more sense to use the inorganic method for your inorganic things.
Yeah, that's right. And you could work from a sculpt and then box model over the top of it. That's also a fairly common workflow. Me personally, I will always go low poly box into high poly. And actually, I still do that when I'm sculpting as well, particularly for characters.
Yeah, for the simplicity of this concept, I felt way more confident to go straight into box modeling instead of starting with ZBrush or Nomad. If it was a character, it's more likely that I would have started with sculpting.
Yeah, so either way is a valid workflow. It really just depends on what you prefer.
What you feel confident with and what you can go fast.
Yeah, exactly. And I go a lot faster as box modeling into characters, and some people go faster going straight into sculpting.
Yeah, which is something to consider when you're in a day job. You had to deliver things on time. You can't spend ages in one stage.
And you also have to be cognizant of the person that you're going to pass it on to. So is the delivery method, or is the method you're using, going to give a good result?
Yeah, it's actually pretty rare, someone in a role like mine, because I work as a 2D and a 3D artist, so I can do my own concepts and create the production assets, but usually that's not the case.
So what's the brief for this?
Well, it was a cat sword. It's for mobile in an unlit environment.
So what does that mean? So if it's for mobile, what are your restrictions then?
You have to keep the poly count fairly low.
Mm-hmm.
You have to optimize the textures, keep them maybe like 512 on size, not have a whole heap of them.
And in terms of unlit, what does that mean?
It means that there's gonna be one diffuse texture and there's no lights on the engine, so any shadow, any light, they have to be baked, they have to be painted in the texture.
Yeah, so you're painting in occlusion, you're painting in shadow. Non-PBR, I'm assuming then? So
non-PBR, just flat diffuse.
So just flat diffuse, no metallic specularity, anything like that. No emission, no glow. Pretty common for like sort of low spec mobile. Some of the more high spec stuff might do some of it, but for the most part you probably won't see too much, I guess. Depends on the game, I guess. All right.
Yeah, I know that the spec might not look very glamorous because everyone wants to be doing like AAA high fidelity things, but these sort of things are a pretty good challenge to keep things really optimized, to make them look good. Painting by hand, making it successfully, it's a big learning curve.
Yeah, and also the advantage of getting good at being optimized for mobile. It means that when you are working on something that's got a lot more headroom, so like AA, AAA, or something that's in a 3D engine that's a little bit more advanced, Unreal or Unity or something like that. Not that those can't do mobile, but your platform, your target platform being non-mobile, you're going to have heaps of polys to work with, and you'll be able to make it look good easier, I would say.
Yeah, and like even if you're working on AAA, you gotta give the resources to what matters the most. You can't spend all your polygons on a prop like this one. You gotta give it to your character, and as well, your character cannot take all the real estate. You gotta leave for the environment. You gotta leave for anything else that comes in the game.
Yeah, if you put 20 million polys into, whatever, it's not going to be able to animate. So
exactly, it's gonna make a cool model, but it's not gonna make a good game.
yeah, and your animator and your rigger, which is me, that's my job, is going to hate you and not want anything to do with you again.
Yeah, you gotta think about the next person in the pipeline. That is very, very important.
Yeah,
Because you're working with teams. You gotta
Exactly.
make things that work on the next stage. It might look pretty where you're at, but if it doesn't work on the next stage, that's gonna be costly.
that's right. So you're working on the hilt here. This is using extrude along curve, I'm assuming.
Yep, I started first doing it by extruding manually a flat plane and create an instance and mirror it so I could get like the swirling tails. But it was getting a bit hard to control. I thought it was much easier to work with curves and then just extrude it. I can still move the curve to make sure that it looks as I want. And the mirroring with instance is so good for this process, just makes it very easy, very intuitive.
Yeah, and I think we've probably got about 1,000 people in the comments saying, why aren't you using Blender? Why aren't we using Blender here?
Because our studio uses Maya.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't do this in Blender. Both of us are probably better in Maya. Would that be fair?
We
to
have
say?
a lot more experience with Maya. Yeah.
I prefer Maya just because I know it better, and
Yeah,
I prefer
I-
other packages for the same reason.
I've used Blender a fair amount of times, but like when we got this job, it was like, we need to go full-time Maya.
Yeah, and the reason the studio uses Maya because they will work with vendors that require Maya as well, so they will
It's-
pass.
There's a lot of studios that now work with Blender, but it's still the majority, the standard to work with Maya. You can do plenty of things with Blender, but like you said, a lot of our vendors will require the editing files and they will request Maya.
Yeah, but true story, I did actually use Blender this week for work, so there you go.
I've used Blender for work.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely is part of the pipeline.
To be fair, I've used Nomad for work.
Yeah, there's no reason not to. I mean, you use what works, and like if your project lead is like, I need this by then, and you're like, well, this is going to do it fastest and it's going to give me a good result, then just use that. If it's
Yeah.
available to you, then great.
And it worked just fine because I eventually got the files exported to something else. It wasn't, of course, the final delivery was not the Nomad project.
Yeah, it was still probably touched up somewhere else, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was a character which I retopologized then in Maya.
Yeah. So box modeling, we're kind of getting far along here in the actual model itself. What are you thinking about as you're going in here? We're putting some bevels and things in, and some of the more details in the silhouette. Why didn't you approach those earlier?
Because I don't like to go into the smaller detail things early on. It's really easy to get carried away by those, and then there's bigger problems that you're not realizing.
It's a classic art style or art workflow, work big to small. When you do it when you're drawing, you do it when you're animating, and then you also do it when you're sculpting. You get good strong silhouettes. You don't want to be going in and putting bevels on things too early, because then you wreck your topology and be like, actually I don't want all these polygons, and it's a real pain to get rid of and redo. So
Yeah, this stage that I'm on at the moment, that is the optimizing. So that means that I already figured out the shape, and now I'm trying to make it as low poly as possible. On the eyes, you saw me adding those extra birds because I want the silhouette to read as circular as possible, not to look like a polygon. But the inside ones were not needed as much because if you look at it from far, it looks spherical or squash spherical, I guess.
Yeah, and also obviously getting rid of faces that can't be seen. So you don't want to have polygons that are inside facing because you can't see them in the engine, so delete them.
Yeah, anything that you don't see, you don't need.
Yeah, so, and it's like, classic animation thing as well. If you can't see it, don't animate
You
it.
don't animate it.
Yeah, less of a thing in game, unfortunately, because you can generally see everything.
That's true, yeah.
But for modeling, which I still have to do as well as for my job, same thing, because don't model it if you can't see it.
Yeah. So for your day job, you are actually an animator and rigger.
Correct, yeah. So I still do a bit of everything when needed. Like the last major animation thing that I did, I actually modeled myself from concept, and I didn't do the textures, but then, obviously rigged and animated 30 seconds of footage.
Yeah, in my case, I'm more like a generalist 3D artist, mostly focused on modeling and texturing.
And UI.
Yes, well, that's the side of my role where I'm also a 2D artist.
Yeah. So it's good to wear a couple of hats, particularly because we live in a small country. So specialized roles are less common.
Yeah, that is true. If any of you out there is wanting to do this as your job, it's more likely that you're gonna spend most of your time on smaller studios.
Yeah, or start at least on a smaller studio.
Yeah. So you will need to do a bit of everything. Definitely good to specialize in smaller areas, but yeah, we're used to doing a tiny bit of a bunch of things.
Yeah. And so now we're moving into everyone's favorite part, which is UV unwrapping.
I actually quite like UV unwrapping.
I know that you do.
Because I'm a sociopath or something.
I don't think that's it, but sure. So keys to UV unwrapping. What is important here?
Well, you might have noticed that almost half of my model is missing. That's because I'm gonna mirror things, and I rather do the unwrapping once instead of twice.
Yeah.
So as soon as I mirror this, I'm gonna mirror the UVs as well. So yay!
And in terms of workflow, what are we trying to achieve with it? What is a UV map for those people that maybe don't know?
You're taking your model and like taking the skin off and flattening it. Like if you had a mandarin and you peel it off and you try to like put it on a flat table.
Yeah, so you were trying to make the surface flat, and we do this because we need to put textures on.
Yeah,
and you can't.
If it's flat, you can apply an image to it.
Yeah, so a texture map is always two-dimensional. Like if you look at a JPEG, it's a two-dimensional thing. So
precisely.
The output image needs to be in a two-dimensional format, and to be able to write one, you need to be able to have those coordinates in 2 dimensions. Whereas at the moment, before the UV unwrap occurs, everything is essentially in vectors.
Yeah.
So this is what it's doing, and we chop it up into little different pieces.
Yes, you have a limited space. You have a square, which the image can be of any resolution that you want, but like I mentioned earlier, I was going for 512 pixels, and I had to make everything fit, everything have a texture density. I am separating the eyes because of as you might have seen on the intro, the eyes blink. So I am gonna apply a sprite to it. Here I was still kind of figuring out what was the best way to do that. So I temporarily put the eyes there because I was thinking maybe I'm gonna keep the pupil separate, but the color of the iris on a different mesh.
Yeah.
UV also helps me find the issues. Like I did find that I had like duplicated words there. There's a few areas of the modeling that if you watch slowly, it's messy. Then I had to clean up a bunch of things. And then when I was doing my export to substance, there were things that were not working, the mesh normals.
Yeah.
Like if you see the crossguard of the sword, it looks like mushy, like all soft. That's because my mesh normals were not working correctly. Then I told you, and then I went back, and I found that I had ingons.
Ah, classic. So yeah, it can be a number of different, and ingons is more than four-sided polygons, just for those who don't know. So your UV layout's done. Also, we should say that you don't necessarily have to use one UV tile, but commonly you will. If you're working in mobile, you definitely will. You can use material sets, which will allow you to use duplications of one tile, or UDIMs, which is multiple UV tiles. But those are more maybe advanced workflows.
Yeah. So now we're no longer in Maya. We are in Substance 3D Painter, which is a pretty cool software because you can paint things on 3D. Before Substance, on the old days, we used to paint the textures flat and they apply them and hope it was gonna work.
Well, you go back and forth a lot. So you'd be exporting a 2D image from Photoshop, which is not, there you go, Photoshop, creating an alpha or something.
Doing an alpha, yes.
Yep. So yeah, creating a painting on the two-dimensional layout of the UV, so what you just cut up, whereas this is giving you the 3D model to paint directly on. So it's quite nice being able to do that. This is, I mean, we say it's like new, but it's like it's been a thing for like 15 years or thereabouts.
Yeah, I mean, considering I've been using Maya for like 10 years, Substance still feels like, oh, this is so new.
Yeah, so like you said, you're just painting diffuse maps, so you do still calculate some things like the normal. Are you calculating normals in some world space stuff? Or?
Yeah, I just bake all the maps.
Yeah.
So I can get where would be the common ambient occlusions, which are areas the least exposed to light, which are likely to create shadows.
Yeah, so like tight areas where you can see around the crossguard there's some like dark shadows. So you've painted some of that manually and you're drawing some from the AO, is that correct? Or?
Most of it I am doing procedurally or through the bakes.
Okay.
I do touch-ups by hand.
And then you're painting in some highlights there as well, as if it was sort of catching a highlight from a light.
That I did by hand because my bakes were messed up.
From your engons.
From my engons, so, which works, but if I have to go back and redo something which is not unusual because the client wanted a different design, then I will have to repaint everything as well. So I work procedural as much as possible because it's non-destructive.
Yeah, and being able to swap in and out of different, I mean, this is why material sets are good. You're using material sets actually. I can see you've got an iMat.
The eyes, yeah.
So just splits things up where you can quickly assign and reassign and swap in pieces of the model and whatnot. And it's definitely something that both of us have experienced where clients have said, actually, this. And you're like, ooh, I spent a long time on that thing and now you're asking me to change it.
Yeah, usually when you take shortcuts, that's where the client is going to ask for a change, and that shortcut is going to end up costing more time.
Yeah, so working like as modular as possible is good, working as non-destructive as possible. And just real clean. Just be really, really clean and real specific about like everything that you do. I know a lot of people feel like it's wasting time, but man, you save so much time by spending time at the beginning.
Yeah, it might seem a bit silly to spend that time at the start, but it really, really helps. And if you're looking for a job, knowing non-destructive workflows is going to make you more competitive. It's going to make you more attractive to hire.
Yeah, if you can show that in your reels or portfolios, it's a little bit difficult to show, but it's something that you should definitely be familiar with, and then also be able to show if you ever do an art test or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually something that you communicate more on cover letters or during interviews. Because you show how pretty your work is. Many people can do pretty stuff, but can you do things that work on the technical side?
Yeah, often what we've seen is that there are some really good artists, but they're not particularly good in a pipeline. So you might get something, whether you're freelancing or you're in a studio or wherever, you get something from somewhere and you're like, what? Why has it been done this way? This is really weird. And it ends up costing you a lot of time because you're trying to fix things so you can actually work on it efficiently. Yeah,
things that look pretty are not necessarily enough. Because this is not an art gallery. These are things that are going to be used. So this is why you gotta know your specs early on. You gotta know the engine that you're gonna use. You gotta know the kind of export.
Yeah, exactly. Like this substance part here, you need to know what the file format is going to be ultimately. So is it going to an FBX? Is it going out as a for Unreal? How do you combine all the maps? So Unreal takes, is it going as UDIMs? Because you needed to know that before you even started. Yeah, and sometimes things might look good here in Substance or Maya,
but they're not gonna work. And you gotta figure out why is it not working on the engine or whatever is the final output.
Yeah, so I mean, and also it helps to be able to sort of confirm that it does look correct in the engine. So you should ideally be able to test it in the engine yourself, at least in a simple way. Just look at it under its lighting conditions, whatever the renderer is in the specific engine that you're using, and be like, yeah, I know that it works. And then if the client comes back, you can say, okay, I can understand what they're saying.
Anyway, we got the final asset here. We're going through the whole process, and this is what it looks like at the end.
Yeah, so this is, funnily, you just kind of did this for yourself, essentially.
Yeah, I wanted to show the process of how I do things at work, because I know that I do a lot of nomad stuff here on YouTube, so it might look like that's what I do in my job, but the reality is quite different. The thing is that the things that I do at work I cannot show because they're under NDA, so
it's quite difficult.
I needed a concept excuse that I can show freely.
Yeah, so if you guys found this useful, let us know in the comments, or if there's any sort of parts of the pipeline that you want to sort of see the process more of. We can probably look at doing another one of these commentary videos, because obviously we do everything essentially from start to finish. I don't think there's anything that we don't code. I mean, I know a tiny little bit, so don't ask me about that.
I did it on university. I liked it, but I like more what I do.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially everything on the visualization side we can sort of look at and talk about. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole thing, I think.
It is.
So for me, Michael.
And Erika, thank you for watching.
And we'll see you in the next video.